Klaus von Dohnányi was a minister in the governments of Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt. His father Hans was a leader of the anti-Nazi resistance. He himself doesn't shy away from voicing criticism, not even of his own party. We're talking to him about the future of Germany and of Europe. Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Mr. von Dohnányi, you've worked with some important chancellors, and you're close friends with Angela Merkel. Given your wealth of experience, does she ever ask you for advice?
No, we never discuss politics.
Was politics simpler in those days than it is now in Angela Merkel's era?
The world has become a lot more complicated. There are many more states. If you look at the US and other states, countries have a growing need to retreat and focus on their own interests. There are signs of dissolution in Catalonia, the Basque Country and Scotland. One consequence of globalization is that a number of regions are seeking autonomy. Brussels is too far away, Washington is too far away. They would rather be self-governed, and of course that makes things harder.
Angela Merkel is seen as the world's most powerful woman.
Something she doesn't like to hear.
But that's how she's seen, and there's some truth to it. Even so, there is little she can do to rein in Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. How much room to maneuver does she actually have?
There are two aspects to what you've said. The US is insofar problematic because of the sanctions it's always imposing, specifically in order to force states to do things they don't want to do. That's their expressed goal.
Blackmail, basically.
Yes, and they can get away with it because the US market is important for German and international companies. And the US can isolate anyone who doesn't do what it wants. Putin is different. We should be spending more time talking to him. But the Americans are in the way, blocking talks, negotiations, and any opportunities to get along with him. Even though good American politicians I know, and others who have a sound reputation, agree that keeping channels of communication open is the only way forward.
And Europe is weak. Why?
Europe is weak because Europe can't agree on a common foreign and defense policy. I've long been of the opinion that it boils down to Germany and France. Germany and France need to take charge. They need to lead Europe. There's never been a union within a large region without hegemonic partners. And Germany and France need to assume hegemonic status and step up as the leading powers in Europe. Until France has understood the opportunity it has, together with Germany, Europe won't make any progress.
But the opposite of this is happening. It feels as though Europe is winding down. Britain is exiting. Eastern European countries are saying, sure, we'll take the money, but we don't want any responsibilities. The Italians are saying there should be a parallel currency that allows them to get out of debt. Can the EU as we know it be salvaged?
No one understands what Italy's on about. Let's wait and see. Eastern Europe is saying it wants to be heard. In this respect, the US is playing an unfortunate role because it went out of its way to convince these countries to be terrified of Russia. And it played a not inconsiderable role in the Ukraine problem. We need to talk very clearly about US interests and European interests. They're conflicting interests. That's just how it is. Refugees are not arriving on American soil in dinghies, whereas they're here on our doorstep. We need to talk honestly about these issues. But in my opinion, Germany and France are not speaking with one voice, and they're failing to get the EU's 27 states to speak with one voice.
Many countries struggle to speak with one voice because it takes so long to form governments. Not just here, also in Italy and in other countries too. What does this mean for European democracies?
I would say that liberal democracies, not just in Europe, but in Australia, New Zealand and Iceland, wherever you look, have a big problem. There are no solid constitutional structures that meet the needs of our new era. For example, if you bear in mind what happened in the Weimar Republic, it didn't fail because there were too few Democrats in Germany. That's what's often said, and it's utter nonsense. In 1928, Hitler had 3% of the vote. Support then grew during the economic crisis, when there was a sort of civil war raging in Germany. There was no stable government. We have to see if our system for electing and forming a government is sufficiently stable to weather the turbulent times ahead. And they will be turbulent, very turbulent.
Democracies are becoming weaker.
They don't have to become weaker. They could just be organized differently. If it weren't for the constructive vote of no confidence and the 5% hurdle, which Italy doesn't have, then we too would have had 15 governments in 20 years, like the Italians.
But democracies are becoming weaker. Europe's becoming weaker. At the same time, social democracy is in disarray. What's the reason, in your opinion?
It's an international problem, and I'd say the main reason is to do with some of the problems that affect us all: growing inequality, the need for a more just distribution of wealth. That's very hard to achieve in a liberal democracy, and no one has yet managed to find a way that works. Here in Germany, we do quite well when it comes to income disparity, where we're among the best performing countries in the world. But we still have a problem when it comes to wealth inequality, where we have problems deriving from earlier crises, high inflation after the First World War and the devastation of the Second World War. We still haven't got to grips with the consequences of these crises. That's a problem. We're always hearing these days about large inheritances, but many people don't have one, and that's something we need to think about.
You've been a member of the Social Democrats, the SPD, for over 60 years. In the last federal election, its support fell to a record low of 20.5%. Surveys show that right now it's at 17%. Is the party, now once again in a coalition with Merkel, shrinking?
It's not because of the coalition. It has to do with the lineup it chose, and clearly it made a cardinal error with Martin Schulz. He was incapable of leading a party, leading the SPD, incapable of thinking through political decisions. He's a nice guy, but he's not a good politician. He should never have been made leader.
One idea to revive the party's fortunes is to form a collective left-wing movement made up of the SPD, the Greens, and the Left Party. Politicians such as Rudolf Dressler from the SPD are starting to agree, saying the time has come for a new type of left wing. What do you think?
I think something like that is possible, but I think we need to guard against the possibility that radicals determine the direction, which is what often happens in these cases. In the past, whenever Social Democrats and Communists have joined forces, it's been the Communists who've had the upper hand, even when they were initially a minority. So we need to make sure that we don't end up led by people whose policies are bad for Germany.
But you don't categorically oppose the idea.
I don't think it's great, but I think it is possible that it will happen.
Your hero, Willy Brandt, also referred to a left-of-center majority.
Led by him.
That's the difference.
Exactly.
You studied in the U.S., were a manager at Ford, and you've said that the SPD still doesn't understand the demands of a globalized world. Do you still believe that?
I do. The globalized world has made competitiveness the most decisive factor in how we behave. For example, Trump has cut corporate taxes. We have a higher corporate tax rate in Germany. So then Germany immediately wonders if it needs to follow suit. The competitive conditions in the world determine agendas, and that's a premise we need to accept. We can't keep saying that there are no inherent factual constraints, as the SPD is always saying. Of course there are, and we need to deal with them constructively. When the SPD finally acknowledges the link between competition, the market and freedom, which also obliges you to do certain things which you might prefer to do differently, then it will get back on track.
I already mentioned that you're close friends with Chancellor Angela Merkel and her husband. How come you're so close?
We have a similar way of thinking. We're both pragmatists. We're interested in art and music. We meet up to go to concerts. We get along very well on that level. We take a very pragmatic view of the world. That's what you need to have if you want to do politics. If you're going to be in politics, then you need to face up to reality and not champion hopes that are bound to be disappointed.
She also accompanied you when your father was honored.
Yes, that's right. When Yad Vashem recognized my father's efforts to save Jews during the Holocaust, Angela Merkel and her husband were there. And that moved me very deeply, whereas my friends from the SPD were not there. At the time, she was part of the opposition. That was 2003. Then there was a very nice celebration at the Bonhoeffer House, my grandparents' house in Berlin.
Your father was executed by the Nazi regime when you were 16. Was he able to pass on to you any important, meaningful life lesson?
To stand up for what you believe in and not be afraid when others disagree. That's what he taught me.
Mr. von Dohnányi, I'll give you 3 sentences which I'd like you to complete. I won't stop stating uncomfortable truths because...
Stating uncomfortable truths and being an outsider is the only way to be creative.
The SPD will survive because...
Because ultimately, these days, there are more social democratic questions than answers. The answers need to be found.
Europe will only survive if...
Germany and France together take the lead and don't heed what others say.
Klaus von Dohnányi, thanks for talking to us.